Hello everyone and welcome back to another Babbling Nines breakdown video with myself and Sloth today. Interesting one around Alexander Sorloth. Obviously, most people remember him from his not so successful time in the Premier League, but last season he was fantastic in La Liga, and now it's being reported that we've had a £30 million bid rejected, 30 million euros, sorry, bid rejected for Sorloth, and it's going to take around 38 million euros to match that release clause. And similar reports as well coming out that we've made further inquiries around it, and they're holding out for that £32 million release clause. And our first one was offered around 25 million, but they're demanding the full fee. So if you're not aware of who Sorloth is, here's a little bit of an overview for you. So his nationality is obviously from Norway. He's actually really tall, 6'5", left-footed. 28 now, approaching 29 in December. His contract expires in 2028, having joined Villarreal last year in 2023. And again, as we said, their estimated value of around 38 million euros. And you can see from the heat map on the right-hand side, he is very much a focal point centre forward for Villarreal. So not a name I thought we'd be linked to be honest, Sloth, but he's had a fantastic season last season in the La Liga. I think he scored 23 goals, got 6 assists. So he was one of the best scoring in the league. Is this a link that inspires you, excites you?
I think he's a very, very good forward. And, Norway fans will tell you that there are aspects of his game that are better than Haaland. There are elements of his game, his hold-up play and some of his link-up play and first touch that are better than his. However, I think for the sort of fee that is going to take, and the type of player he is as well. I watched him a lot at Stuttgart when he was there for a very short period, but he's very much a confidence player, and I think that West Ham is not the club you want to be at if you're a confidence player, and I don't mean that in too negative a way, but if the fans get on your back, they're going to be on your back, and it's going to be hard to get them off. And I think that while he's got a lot of the attributes to succeed, especially in the Premiership, it's just the overall question marks that I have about him. This is his only really good season, and I think that it's questionable if he would be able to make the jump from La Liga into the Premier League and carry that sort of form as well.
Yeah.
And that would be my big worry about this deal, especially for the sort of fee, because with a release clause, you'll have to pay it up front. You have to pay everything in one go.
Yeah.
And unless we're going over the release clause and paying, say, 40 million or making it worth their while, I don't really see why we would choose to spend the money on him, with all due respect.
Yeah, no, it's a good point as well. It's like you say, his first proper good season or like outstanding season in terms of his goal return. I know before last season, sorry, he scored 12 goals in the Liga again. But again, it's a decent return. But I think at the age, the type of player he is, the age he's now coming up to at 29, and as you say, the fee, I think it's going to take more than the release clause, because I don't think we would just pay the release clause because of the installments. The lack of installments that comes with that. But in terms of a player, last season, if you're comparing him to other strikers across Europe, he actually has some pretty good stats. And obviously, we can see here in terms of the goals, he scored 23 goals, which puts him in the 97th percentile. XG, he did massively overperform his XG. His XG was around 13. So again, you can kind of see the overperformance throughout his season last year. And again, you can kind of see the goal conversion was actually really high. His aerial duel percentage and aerial duels one is actually quite high as well. Again, you'd expect that for the type of player he is. And again, he's not someone that's massively contributing to, say, the build-up, but when it does come into the final third, he was actually pretty good. And again, he's mainly a goal scorer. And again, if we compare him to, say, a Michail Antonio, you can kind of see here the differences. Obviously, Sorloth in the grey, Antonio in the red. So there's aspects of his game where he's better than Antonio. Again, like you'd expect him to score more goals. He's a better goal scorer. He'll take more shots. His conversion rate's a lot higher. But other than that, I don't think he offers much more than, say, an Antonio profile does in terms of, you look in the bottom left-hand corner there, the progressive runs, the dribbles. And we've said we need someone that's going to be able to do that in a Lopetegui system and not just be a focal point. They need to do both sides of it. So that's where my reservations kind of lie with it. And I think he's a decent player. I just don't think it's worth the money and B, the right profile for what we need. How would you assess his season last season? What would you say his biggest strengths are as a player, Sorloth? This video is sponsored by Emotive. Emotive provide cutting-edge digital services, solutions, and training to companies and businesses of all sizes. Emotive have worked with some fantastic brands in the past, as you can see behind me, the likes of Apple, Google, Tesco, and of course, Babylon Irons. Emotive offer 4 key services, the first being digital solutions, the second being professional training and coaching, the third being fractional experts, and the fourth being AI readiness. We're going to be working with Emotive on our channel to improve how we showcase the data to you guys in our breakdown videos and data analysis videos. If you want to find out more information about how Emotive can work with you, make sure to scan the QR code now, which will take you to emotivetouch.com, where you can find out more details about the company, and the link will be in the description. A massive thank you to Emotive once again for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it.
He was fantastic last season, and it's his size and physicality that really make him a handful. But also, he is quick, so it's not a case of Haller 2.0 where people are going to think, oh, he's just a big target man and he's not going to be able to make those runs. He will run the channels and he will give you an outlet, but it's going back to that issue of confidence. And I'd mentioned it before, but he is a confidence player, and I think for me he's not shown enough clinical edge. He has in the past 2 seasons, but when we're talking about replacing Antonio, we very much need an improvement on Antonio. And I think he's the sort of player who would come to the Premier League and get 10 goals, and he would probably just keep getting 10 unless he had one amazing season like he's had this season. But my worry is that he can't translate that into the Premier League. And I think he also scored a few penalties. So some of that is, we have to factor that in. But it's also a case of I think there are better value options out there. And if we are going to spend, say, 38 million euros on a release clause, why aren't we offering that sort of money for an Ivan Toney, who has consistently had good seasons in the Premier League? Last season, bit different, but he's always looked sharp. And I think if we were to offer that sort of figure for a slightly older, more experienced striker, I'd much rather put that cash towards a player who has consistently scored, 10 plus goals. Whereas Sorloth, he's gone through seasons where he scored like 5. And I think that just isn't good enough. You can't have a gamble on that sort of player when, if this is their peak, and last season was arguably the best he'd had in a long time, he was only scoring 14 goals. We say only, but when you're looking to spend 38 million euros, that's the sort of level you should be looking at.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, back in 2021, when he was in the Bundesliga, he scored 5 goals, and then he moved to La Liga, scored 4 goals. Then again, the season after that, scored 12, then 23. So the numbers have improved. But again, it's that lack of consistency. And I think with what we saw with the XG data, he's massively overperformed in terms of the output in front of goals. So I think that needs to also be taken quite carefully. But again, if we look at something like this, which shows us the kind of data for the goals and the XG here. So you see where Sorloth is there, 23 goals. His XG was 13.29. He's averaging around 2.33 shots per 90. But his goal conversion rate is actually pretty high. 31% isn't that bad. You compare that with someone like Jonathan David at the top there, who was pretty much bang on with his XG and goals output. He scored 19. His XG was 19.34. So he was kind of consistent. So what he produced was actually expected last season. Slightly lower goal conversion rate, and takes, slightly more shots. But again, the percentage of shots on target was also higher. But yeah, it's interesting to see where Sorloth lies on this data. You can see he performed very well in terms of the goal output in this kind of bottom x-axis, but on the y-axis, again, the xG, it's something you'd want him to be high with to match that. So yeah, I think that kind of nicely illustrates our point of he's had a fantastic season for Villarreal. He could very much, do that again this season. I think it's more difficult for him to sustain that. But again, a £38 million release clause, something you're having to pay in full. I wouldn't be going near it. I don't think we have the budget or resource to be doing those types of moves right now. We've got a lot of other stuff to do. I want to build from the back, but I also understand the importance of bringing in a striker for this season. So if it was to happen, Sorloth, and we brought him in for the release clause, what is that out of 10 for a transfer for you? Could he potentially translate some of those goals into the Premier League and get a similar return? Or is it what you mentioned before? It's very unlikely he'll do that. And, paying it in full kind of puts a damper on the transfer.
I think it's a very difficult one because he does have all the raw attributes to really be a success. But as I mentioned, I do worry that if he had a bit of a stinker or dropped a couple of clangers in a row, missed a few chances, he would just kind of go back within his shell and we would see the Bundesliga Sorloth. And I think that would be a real shame for him. I think he's kind of found a home where he is now, and he's got confidence and he seems quite happy there. So I'm not too sure whether he would want the move, to be honest with you, but I also think that for us, there's better ways to spend that money. And, I mentioned Ivan Toney, but also if you look at some of the other players who are big physical strikers across Europe, there's Barry at Basel. And there's a young player at Strasbourg whose name has completely escaped me. I think it's Giselle or something like that. But he's about 6'5", and they're both sort of 20. And you think if you want a player who's going to be able to score those goals, you almost have to be able to find them in different leagues at the moment because you're paying a premium otherwise. I think if it were to happen, I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10 because I do like him, but it's just a case of which him turns up. And if he were to have the service of Kudus, Bowen, whichever left winger we get in, the passing of Paqueta, I think he would have a good chance of reproducing this season. But I just worry there's safer ways to spend that money as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'd probably give it I think if you're looking at it objectively, you're getting someone who scored one of the highest goal tallies last season across Europe with 23 goals in the league, which is a really good return. And he also had 1 and 2 in the Europa League. I think he scored 3 and 6 games in Europe. So it's a very good return when you look at the data and look at, what it was. But when you analyze the underlying data behind it, it's hard to sustain. I worry that we spend that 38 million all in one go on a release clause, and we have the situation which we've just kind of described, where he underperforms and goes back to where we'd probably expect him to be statistically in, I would say, in arguably a tougher league to score goals in a different type of setup. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I would give it a 5. It's hard to put it lower than that because of his return last season. But again, it's harder to put higher than that because of the way we'd spend the money and the other options available on the market. But let us know in the comments. Would Sorloth interest you this summer? Would you like to see him in a West Ham shirt after a very impressive return for Villarreal last season? Let us know down below. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed the breakdown. Subscribe to the channel for more content throughout the summer and the rest of the year. And Sorloth, until the next one.
Come on, you irons.